The night was cold on the desert planet Thylon 9. The wind carried dust and the faint smell of burned metal from the old trader routes. Daniel, a young human traveler, moved slowly across the dunes, his boots sinking in the sand. He was tired but careful. The sky above him was filled with bright stars and two pale moons that made the broken world look peaceful but lonely. Daniel was searching for scrap, broken metal, wires and pieces of old ship parts he could sell for food and fuel. Life on the edge of the galaxy was hard, and humans were still new here. Many alien worlds didn't welcome them yet, but Daniel didn't mind. He liked being alone, away from noise and people. As he walked near an old crash site, he heard something strange. It was a small, weak sound like a soft cry. He stopped and listened again. The wind blew, and then he heard it once more. It was not an animal. It sounded like someone was in pain. He followed the sound through the wreckage until his torchlight fell on a broken metal pod half buried in sand. The door was bent open. Inside, a small shape was curled up. Daniel's breath caught in his chest. It was a girl. Not human. Her skin had a faint silver-blue color, her hair was white and tangled, and her wrists were locked in trader cuffs. She looked thin and weak, her large turquoise eyes staring at him in fear. Daniel lowered his torch and spoke softly. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The girl tried to move away, her voice shaking. "You will sell me too?" she asked in a broken accent. He froze. That one sentence told him everything. She had been captured by traders, creatures who sold living beings for money. Daniel shook his head quickly. "No, never. I'm here to help you." He took out his small plasma cutter and gently sliced through the cuffs. The metal dropped to the floor with a dull sound. She flinched, expecting pain, but none came. He reached out slowly and offered her his water flask. She hesitated, then took it and drank greedily. When she finished, her eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "Thank you." "What's your name?" Daniel asked. "Lyra," she said softly. That night, Daniel carried her on his back across the dunes. The stars guided him, and he walked for hours until he reached his small shelter, made from old ship parts and metal sheets. It wasn't much, but it was safe. He laid her on a cot, gave her soup from a heat pack, and covered her with his only blanket. She was weak but alive. As she ate, her hands shook. "Why help me?" she asked. Daniel looked at her kindly. Because no one else did. Over the next few days, she started to trust him. She still woke up from bad dreams, whispering strange words from her language, but she no longer looked afraid when he entered the room. She didn't know much about human life, but she watched him closely. He was patient, gentle, and strong. He taught her simple human words: food, water, sleep, friend. In return, she taught him words from her language, Ziratal. He learned that she came from a noble family of her world, the Ziratal Dominion. But her planet had been attacked, her people scattered, and she was taken as a captive by traders. Daniel didn't know much about her kind, but he could tell she was not ordinary. One evening, while he repaired a broken rover outside, he noticed her drawing something in the sand with a stick. It looked like tall towers and curved domes. "What's that?" he asked. "My home," she said softly. "The sky there was purple. I used to sit on the roof with my sister and watch the ships." Her voice trembled. Daniel looked at her for a moment, then said, "We'll get you home." It took him months to fix an old shuttle he had found half buried in the canyon. Lyra helped him however she could, passing tools, cleaning parts, sorting wires. Sometimes she laughed softly at his jokes, and for a few seconds the sadness in her eyes disappeared. At night they sat outside watching the stars. She would ask questions about humans. "Do you have many worlds?" "Not as many as your kind," he said with a small smile. "But we're learning fast," she nodded. "Humans are strange. You fight, you fall, but you rise again." He chuckled. "We call that stubbornness." Lyra smiled for the first time since he'd met her. It was a small smile, but it made her look alive again. Finally, the shuttle was ready. Daniel filled it with enough fuel and food for a one-way trip to the nearest Ziratal outpost. He didn't tell her how dangerous it would be for him to go there. Humans were still distrusted in that part of space, but he didn't care. When the day came, she stood by the door wearing one of his old jackets. It was too big for her, but she liked it. Her eyes shone with gratitude. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "Because someone has to," Daniel said, "and because you deserve to go home." She looked down, then whispered, "You saved me." He shook his head. "No, I just did what was right." When the shuttle reached the border of Zyratel space, Daniel stopped. He couldn't go farther. Their scanners might see him as a threat. He looked at her one last time. This is where we say goodbye. Her lips trembled. Will I see you again? He forced a smile. The galaxy's big. Maybe one day. She leaned forward and pressed her small blue hand against his. I will remember you, Daniel of Earth. Then she stepped out, walking toward the landing beacon that would signal her people. He watched until she disappeared into the distance. For a long moment, Daniel sat in silence. Then he turned the shuttle and flew away. He didn't ask for any reward, didn't even tell her his full name. He only wanted her to be free. Years passed. He worked as a pilot, a mechanic, and sometimes as a guide for travelers on lonely planets. Life moved on. But sometimes on quiet nights when he looked at the stars, he thought about that little girl with turquoise eyes. He wondered if she ever made it home, if her people were safe, if she still remembered him. 2 decades later, Daniel lived on a small mining colony at the edge of human space. He had grown older, with lines around his eyes and silver strands in his hair. The colony was quiet, mostly miners and traders. He had a small workshop and fixed machines for a living. It wasn't much, but it was peaceful. Then one evening, the ground began to shake. People rushed outside as the sky lit up with a deep blue light. A massive ship was descending, a Royal Zyratel cruiser shining like polished silver. The air trembled with energy. No one on that dusty colony had ever seen such a ship before. Daniel walked out, shielding his eyes. The ship landed gracefully and a ramp lowered. Soldiers in silver armor stepped out first, forming a line. Behind them came a tall woman in elegant robes, her presence commanding respect. Her turquoise eyes glowed softly under the alien light. The people whispered in awe. That's the Zyratel Queen. She raised her hand and a translator drone projected her voice in every language. I seek a man named Daniel of Earth. Daniel's heart stopped. He stepped forward slowly, not believing what he heard. The woman turned toward him, and when their eyes met, everything around them disappeared. She smiled gently. Daniel, she said, her voice soft but clear. I came back, as I promised. He looked at her, stunned. Lyra? She nodded. You saved me once. Now I have come to repay a promise. The miners around them bowed, not understanding what was happening. But Daniel didn't see them. He saw only the same turquoise eyes that once looked at him from the shadows of a broken pod. And for the first time in 20 years, he smiled. Daniel stood frozen as the tall alien woman walked toward him. The silver guards around her moved aside, their armor shining in the light of the ship. Everyone on the colony watched in silence, unsure what was happening. The woman's steps were slow but sure, her robe flowing behind her like water. When she reached Daniel, she stopped only a few feet away. For a moment, no one spoke. Then she smiled softly. You have not changed much, she said in her calm voice. Daniel blinked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra, you're alive. I am, she replied gently. And I am queen now. Her eyes looked at him with warmth that didn't belong to a ruler but to someone who remembered an old friend. I searched for you, Daniel of Earth, she continued. For many years I sent scouts and messages across the sectors, but humans spread fast. You became hard to find. Daniel smiled faintly. I didn't think anyone would remember me after all this time. How could I forget? She said, her voice carrying emotion that even the translator drone could not hide. When everyone else saw me as a thing to sell, you carried me through the desert and gave me hope. The miners around them whispered, surprised that a queen was speaking to a simple human mechanic with such respect. Daniel felt the heat rise in his face, not used to attention. You didn't have to come all the way here for me, he said quietly. Lyra looked at him for a long moment. I came because I wanted to. Then she turned to her guards. Leave us! The guards hesitated, shocked, but obeyed. When they were gone, only Daniel and Lyra remained under the soft hum of the ship. The blue light painted her face with a gentle glow. She reached out and touched his sleeve. You live alone here? He nodded. It's quiet. I fix machines, help the miners. It's enough. She looked around at the dusty colony, the small houses, the cracked roads, the tired faces of the workers. This place is poor, she said softly. Your people deserve better, he smiled. We build slowly. Humans don't give up. Her expression softened again. Still stubborn, she said with a small laugh. They walked together toward his workshop. Inside it was small but neat, filled with tools and engine parts. On a shelf she noticed something, a small piece of metal shaped like a bird. Daniel picked it up. "You remember? You used to draw birds in the sand. I made this later from ship scrap." Lyra took it carefully, her fingers tracing the simple shape. "You kept my memory alive," she whispered. He shrugged. "You reminded me that even in dark places, kindness still matters." For a moment they stood in silence. The years between them seemed to fade away. She looked around at the little workshop, the worn table, the simple chair, and something in her eyes changed. "Daniel," she said softly, "come with me." He looked at her in surprise. "Come with you?" "Yes, to Ziratal, to my home. I want my people to know the man who saved their queen." He shook his head slowly. "I'm not made for royal life. I fix broken engines, not rule planets." "You misunderstand," she said gently. "I don't ask you to rule. I ask you to visit, to see what you helped rebuild. You gave me my freedom. The least I can do is show you what that freedom became." Daniel looked into her eyes and saw sincerity there. After a long pause, he nodded. "All right, just for a while." Lyra smiled, and for a second she looked just like the girl he once rescued. The next day, the entire colony gathered as Daniel prepared to leave. The guards helped him onto the royal shuttle, and Lyra herself guided him through the shining corridors of her ship. He had never seen anything like it. The smooth walls, the soft lights, the soundless movement through space. As they entered hyperspace, he looked out the window at the stars turning into silver lines. "Still feels strange," he said quietly. "Back then I carried you through sandstorms. Now you carry me through the stars." She turned to him, smiling. Maybe that is balance. It took only hours to reach Ziratal space. When the ship descended through the purple clouds of her world, Daniel couldn't speak. The planet was beautiful. Tall crystal towers, shining lakes, and green fields that stretched for miles. The rebuilt capital looked like a dream. As they landed, crowds gathered, bowing as their queen stepped out. When Daniel followed, whispers filled the air. Some guards looked confused. Why was a human walking beside the queen as an equal? But Lyra ignored them. She walked proudly, her head held high. In the great hall of her palace, she turned to him. "This is where I was taken from," she said softly. "For years I thought I would never see it again. But you changed that." Daniel looked around in wonder. "You rebuilt everything," she nodded. "And I ruled in peace, but something was always missing. I never thanked the man who gave me the chance to live this life." She led him to a balcony overlooking the city. "You see that statue?" she said, pointing to a tall monument made of white stone. At its base, he saw a carving of a human figure carrying a small alien girl across the dunes. He stared at it, his heart heavy. "That's me?" "Yes," Lyra said softly. "We call it the Guardian of Hope. My people tell children that once in the darkest time a stranger from a harsh world carried their queen to safety." Daniel didn't know what to say. "You didn't have to do this," she smiled gently. "You once told me to live, I did. And now I want to do the same for your people." Later that evening, she took him to a meeting room where leaders from several alien races were waiting. They rose when she entered. "This is Daniel of Earth," she announced. "He once saved my life. I owe him, and so does my world. From this day, the Ziratal Dominion will open trade and friendship with humans." Gasps filled the room. It was a historic moment. For years, humans had struggled for respect among the older races. But now, because of one man's kindness, a powerful empire offered peace. After the meeting, Lyra and Daniel stood alone again in the quiet garden of the palace. The air was cool and strange flowers glowed faintly in the moonlight. "You changed more than my life today," he said softly. She smiled. "You changed mine first," he looked at her. "I still can't believe the little girl I rescued became a queen. And I can't believe the man who carried me still walks with the same gentle heart," she replied. They sat on the stone bench, watching the stars. Lyra turned to him. "Stay here for a time. Teach my engineers the human way of building and fixing things. My people can learn from you." Daniel hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Maybe I could. Just for a while." Over the next months, Daniel became part of the royal projects, helping the Ziratal repair old machines and design new ones. The aliens respected his skills and often listened to his ideas. Lyra would often visit the workshops, watching him teach with quiet pride. The story of the human who saved their queen spread across systems. On human colonies, his name became known as the man whose kindness changed history. One night, as the stars glittered over the palace, Lyra and Daniel stood together on the balcony again. "You once said humans never give up," she said softly. "Now I understand. Your people's strength is not only in power, it is in heart." Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what makes us human." Lyra looked at him for a long moment. "It makes you more than that. It makes you timeless." He looked out at the shining city, hearing laughter and music below. "Looks like you finally got your peace," he said. She nodded. "Thanks to you." For a while, they stood in silence. Just two souls who had once met in the sands of a dying world, now standing in the light of a thriving one. When Daniel finally returned to his colony months later, he carried no gold, no jewels, no royal gifts. But the moment he landed, he was greeted by a message on the broadcast towers. The Zyratel Dominion had signed a permanent alliance with the United Human Colonies. Everyone cheered. Daniel only smiled quietly, looking at the stars. Somewhere out there, a queen remembered him, not as a hero, not as a savior, but as a friend. And that for him was enough.